We are going to be making a calavera out of paper mache while I talk about the Day of the Dead. Dias de los Muertos is a Mexican holiday that honors and celebrates the dead. The celebration starts at the end of October, usually around Halloween, and extends through All Saints and All Souls Day, which are November 1st and 2nd. Dias de los Muertos is celebrated both in the community and at home. Families gather in cemeteries to clean and decorate the graves. They often stand vigil over the graves, sometimes even overnight. The graves are decorated with flowers, candles, food, and drink. At home, the ofrendas, or altars, are set up and decorated as well. The ofrendas, usually being several tiers, are decorated with flowers, marigolds being favored. Bread, called pan de muertos, sugar skulls, and sugar caskets, drinks, often alcohol, and favorite food items of the departed. The ofrendas is decorated to be inviting so that the deceased loved ones will come into the home. The Mexicans have a unique view of death, and Dias de los Muertos is thought to be part of the Mexican national identity. Because of that unique relationship, it is said that Mexicans do not fear death, but instead laugh at it, or mock death. That is why the skeletons and skulls used in decoration are all grinning. Mexicans invite or welcome death. It is nothing to fear, just a natural part of life. Young children are taught that the dead watch over them, and that as long as you remember those that have died, they are not really dead. And death is the great equalizer. It comes before all of us. Rich and poor, powerful and powerless, you cannot buy your way out of death. That humor towards death is reflected in the smiling faces of the calaveras, or skulls, that are probably the most common decorating item associated with Dias de los Muertos. Grinning skulls and skeletons are everywhere during the holidays. Made in every artistic medium available and in all sizes, they're often brightly colored, many decorated with flowers, especially La Catrina. La Catrina is depicted as a skull or a skeleton of a fancy lady with a large decorated hat. She originated as Jose Guadalupe Posada's Calavera Garbancera. Calavera meaning skull, garbancera being a derogatory way referring to a wealthy and powerful Mexican woman who was denying her culture and trying to look and act like Europeans. Posada was an influential artist in the late 1800s and early 1900s. He was a printmaker and used his position with newspapers and magazines to poke fun at the wealthy who were involved in the corruption he saw in the government. It was a way of making a political statement to his audience, many of whom were illiterate. The message was often that we are all the same under our skin, death comes for us all, privilege and wealth are no protection. He was prolific, producing 1,500 prints during his career, although he died penniless, and ironically was buried in a mass grave. After his death, however, artists like Garcia Rivera kept his work alive. Rivera, in particular, is known for his many depictions of La Catrina. You may wonder where Dias de los Muertos comes from. What I learned in researching the source of the holiday is that it's complicated. Dias de los Muertos is best described as a merger of Mesoamerican traditions, think Aztec, and the Catholic traditions brought by the Spanish colonists. So there are many practices that may have grown out of Aztec rituals of death, but both naturally occurring and as sacrifice. The Aztecs believed that life came from death. If blood sacrifices were made, crops would grow and the people would live. Life and death were just continuations, and it was a ritual performed in the fall. Around harvest time, they believed that the dead would return to their homes and they would keep watch for them with an offering of their favorite meals. There is also a clear influence from the Spanish. For example, the ofrendas was a practice that the Spanish had long used to honor their loved ones. The offering of sweets and breads was also a part of Spanish tradition on All Saints and All Souls Day. All Saints and All Souls Day are now part of Dias de los Muertos celebration. The merging of two traditions was a common theme when the Catholic Church was on a mission to convert people to Christianity. It was the most successful way to achieve conversion. When people can retain their most important rituals, just folded into a new but similar religious belief, they are more likely to convert. The Spanish didn't just bring death and Catholicism to Mexico, though. They also brought sugar cultivation. It seems like an odd combination until you consider the sugar skull. Sugar cultivation in Mexico was for local consumption and not for exportation. As a result, sugar was irregularly available and inexpensive. Sugar skulls and sugar caskets and figures were a cheap way to decorate for Dias de los Muertos and a good way to earn money. The sugar skulls and other figures are often intricately and colorfully decorated, some intended for eating, some intended for the ofrendas. Those as offerings are not eaten, those are for the dead. Dias de los Muertos has changed greatly over the last 50 years. In the 1970s, the Mexican government decided to capitalize on the outside interest in the holiday and selected 11 locations around Mexico that it dubbed and advertised as places for tourists to see authentic indigenous Dias de los Muertos celebrations. As a result, tourists poured into those areas, creating a market for more Day of the Dead merchandise and longer graveside vigils, eventually turning into overnight vigils. Practices changed to reflect what people believed the tourists expected. Many of the local residents of those areas now refer to the holiday as the fair. Perhaps the best example of this holiday reflecting tourists' expectation is in 2016. Mexico City Day of the Dead Parade. It came into being solely because the 1915 James Bond movie Spectre showed a big Day of the Dead parade, and then people thought that tourists would now expect a parade. And I should make clear, Dias de los Muertos is not Mexican Halloween. Although plastic pumpkins and devils have wormed their way into the Day of the Dead celebration, the two holidays have very little in common other than an emphasis on sweets, begging for treats, and lots of skeletons. For starters, Halloween is most definitely a secular holiday. While it once may have been All Hallows Eve, it no longer has any relationship to All Saints' Day. It is also a commercialized holiday that is almost entirely intended for children. Dias de los Muertos is still a celebration of All Saints and All Souls Day, as well as a family and community celebration of life and death. It's a family event for all ages, to honor their loved ones who have died. Even with the commercialization that has crept in, the community still comes together to celebrate. That's why calaveras are smiling, ear hole to ear hole.